Hello, everyone, and welcome to Textile Medley. My name is Danaleah, and I'm a white woman with short brown hair and blue glasses, sitting in a bedroom with art arrayed around me. I'm also the program manager for Intertwine Arts, the organization that is hosting this talk today, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to inspire creativity, joy, and self-confidence through free-form weaving for people of all ages with disabilities or chronic illness. So today we are here for Textile Medley. This is a lunchtime artist talk series that Intertwine Arts is hosting over the summer, where we highlight amazing artists with textile practices and influences, alongside the amazing textile artists that we Intertwine Arts have on staff. Some people may or may not know that we recently went through a renaming from Saori Arts NYC to Intertwine Arts, and this series is part of that change. While we remain weaving focused, we love to encourage and dip our toes into a range of fiber mediums, techniques, and tools that allow everyone to express their tactile creativity in ways that are accessible for disabled and chronically ill artists. Today, for the first in the series, we are interweaving the arts practices of Amanda Martinez and a little self-indulgently myself. And we are going to start off with me sharing my work for around 15 minutes. Then Amanda will share her work for around 15-20 minutes. And then we will have a discussion between us about some of the commonalities and divergences in our work, followed by a short Q&A if we find we have time and questions. So without further ado, I am actually going to share my work. So hello, everyone. My name is Danaleah Schoenfuss, and I am many things. I've always been a crafter. I've always made things artistically. I lived in the ceramics room in high school. Oops, clicked on the wrong thing. I lived in the ceramics room in my high school. On the top left, there is a picture of a bunch of ceramics pieces I made in that time. A lot of them are like organic, tentacly, creepy with eyeballs forms. I have a seahorse, I have a chicken leg. I've always liked these sort of organic forms and also using my hands to make. I am also an arts worker. I've worked in museums for 6 or 7 years and generally arts nonprofits. On the bottom, you can see me wearing a conductor hat as I do an arts program at the New York Transit Museum. And then I am now trying to take myself seriously as an artist. This is actually sort of my first time really putting myself out there as an artist, which is exciting for me. And I primarily do weaving, though I also incorporate other forms as well. And of course, I'm also program manager for Intertwine Arts, which is where my love of weaving came from. And so I also teach art as well. The first piece I want to share is my first weaving. So for this, I was learning to weave on a Saori loom for my job at Intertwine Arts. And I sat down thinking, this is going to be fun. I like doing art, but I didn't think it was going to necessarily be beyond a, professional interest. But when I sat down at the loom, I loved it. I like the sounds that the loom makes. It makes lots of brushing noises. I like the tactility of it. And I loved what I made from that first day, which is what we see here. So this is a woven tapestry with a bunch of stripes. There is white, gray, purple, and one orange-red stripe. And I love this piece. And it kind of started my love of weaving from here. The second slide is called Baby's Second Weaving. So this is the first time I wove on the loom. And I thought this was important to show because I didn't like this piece when I made it. It has sort of this off-white yarn with rainbow flecks that I thought made it look a little like clownish, cartoonish in a way I didn't like. I kept trying to make it into something useful. In the center, there's an image of it, me trying to turn it into a bag. And I just really didn't like it. And so finally I was like, all right, let's make it into art. Like, let's stop trying to make this something useful and make it into an art piece. And so the obvious thing to do was to frame it, which I did. But I didn't like it just being in the frame. So I let it hang a little bit outside of the frame. And I painted the frame with these little eyeball-like things. And it actually is sitting behind me with a bunch of dolls because I like to show things in context. of where it is in my home and how it's displayed. And it does come into play with some of the themes that I'm finding in my work now. I like framing things differently. I like things being very tactile. I like things being playful. And this comes into play with my work. And these are some close-ups where you can see like a little more of that off-white color. You can also see the beads I threaded on, which is actually a very important part of the piece for me. I like to bat at them like a cat, and then I can hear the beads clanking, and I really like that element of it. So I ended up really liking this piece now after really not liking it when it came off the loom. Something I really struggle with when making art is I always want to make things, and I titled the slide this, wearable, usable, functional, and sellable. I think I've always just felt like art, like when I make something, it has to have a use, and I'm trying to get away from that when I make art. And one of the ways I do that is by making jewelry. And that's not to downplay my jewelry. I really like it. I'm wearing a bunch of pieces right now. But I'm trying to be more playful and think less about how to make things professional in a certain way. And on the left, I have a piece that I would consider like a professional jewelry piece that I've made, which I do like. It has this soft gray yarn with some sort of metallic-y blues in it at a diagonal on a circle pendant. But then I'm trying to be more playful now and not think, okay, this has to be like polished. So one that I made right after making that one is what I call the my monkey dragon, which has these sort of dragon-like slitted orange eyes and this pink fabric smile, and then a red woven sort of face. And then there's a bunch of jewelry pieces in the middle. I won't describe them all, but it's just me sort of trying to play with the form, play with scraps, and make things also wearable. Which takes me to this piece, which is really, really important to me, and I'm going to talk a lot about it. This one I call Euphoria in Blue. I have a really hard time taking a professional, nice picture of the full length of it. That's something I have to figure out as an emerging artist, I suppose. But this piece was made in multiple parts in states of euphoria or being very happy. So the centerpiece I made right after I got my professional diagnosis of autism. I was so relieved and so happy. I had all this energy in me when I finally got that professional confirmation of being autistic. I'd been self-identifying for a year prior, but I got rid of that imposter syndrome that was in my head. And then I just needed to do something with my hands. So I started weaving. And that's where the middle piece came from, which has blue and purple and green yarns and roving. And it has this very fluffy fringe that comes out the sides and the bottom and roving poking out. And I love this piece. It would make me really happy to look at it and see it, and I wanted to do something with it. So the second part of this that I made was the fringe at the bottom. It's sort of like a partially woven blue fringe that I have like these squares and rectangles that are woven throughout. I really want to, again, take myself seriously as an artist. So I had one day where I was like, I want to just make art all day. That's all I'm going to do. So I took out my Ashford tabletop loom, which is pictured on the top right. And I just wove for 8 hours straight while binging horror movies. And it was great. It just felt very euphoric to focus on just creation and doing what felt right. And it just naturally sort of went along with the piece I'd already made. And so they sort of slotted together in terms of this sense of euphoria. And then finally, the last part I will talk about in the next slide, which is the metallic background behind the first weaving I talked about. But I did want to mention that the very first weaving on the bottom left was made on a tabletop cardboard loom that I made myself. I want to be able to weave multiple projects at the same time. Sometimes my Ashford loom is taken up. And so to have a quote unquote more professional loom that I can still use on the regular, or if I need another loom, I can whip one up out of cardboard. And so that's what I did for that middle piece. So you're probably hearing some brushing noises. I am actually showing the process of making that metallic background in this video. And it's just rubbing Sharpie away from aluminum foil. I like the brushing noises. I like the reveal. And I like that it's sort of spontaneous. Like I don't always know where exactly the black is going to end up and what's going to be shiny. And so it's a very fun process because it reveals things as I rub away that Sharpie, and it shows all the shapes that I put into, glued onto the cardboard or drew into the aluminum foil. And this technique I discovered, or really rediscovered, because I was looking at the work of Dean Millian. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, Dean Millian. You may have seen his aluminum foil Baby Yoda video on a subway seat. He makes aluminum foil sculptures, and when I saw his stuff, there's a kernel in my head of, oh right, aluminum foil can be art, and I used to make aluminum foil art in high school, and I loved it. Why did I stop? And so I kind of discovered a new medium and was really happy about it, and that's where the background came from. So I have a lot of feelings about this piece, and it's not finished. I think I'm still going to add to it, but I'm very happy with where it's at right now. And these are just some close-ups. I used a lot of fluffy and shiny yarns, which I think works well with the aluminum foil. Next is my monster pillow collection that I'm slowly building up. So this is a purple blue pillow with heart eyes and some fringe at the bottom. And this is part of the playfulness that I always find in art. It's a very comforting object. It's very cute. It's interactable. You kind of project a lot onto it when it's sort of like a doll-like object. And so I'm really excited about this when I first made it, and I wanted to make more. Which brings me to the second one. And I want to make them increasingly larger and larger until there's one that's me-sized. But this one was interesting to make because I wanted it to, a big thing with me is I like planned spontaneity. Like I have a general plan of what I'm going to do, but I want to build in spontaneity, which is sort of what happens with the aluminum foil embossing. And with this, I actually tied a whole bunch of scraps together to make a ball of yarn. And then I wove using that scrap ball. And so I never knew where the different yarns were going to end up. And it made this very uneven, fluffy weave, which turned into the pillow. And so there's a certain amount of planning to it, but the spontaneity comes from the general process. And this guy has star eyes, yellow star eyes, and a pink heart nose that I think makes it look a little pig-like. But something I think that is the most like experimental part of what I've been doing is something that I call wrecking the frame, which started with this piece, which I really like. I just took a bunch of scraps and put it in this frame that had a front and a back to it, because I saw it on Pinterest. I thought it was interesting. And I was like, okay, so it's in a frame, but like that's boring. Like I want to like move outside of frames. Frames are something that we just all use to make things look professional, and why is that a thing? And so I just started trying to cover up the frame with scraps and little projects, and until it became what we see here. And so I think that's something I'm trying to play with, is using non-frames to display weavings. Which takes me to here. So I've been making a lot of art yarn pieces. I'm actually wearing a necklace. This is a way of winding yarn together and then finding ways to display it. And so I have this crinkly metallic bag. I have bottles, and this is a candle jar that said sunlight, and I had a bunch of pieces I filled that make me think of sunlight. I have word vomit over here. It's just me thinking of different ways to display pieces that aren't the typical way of displaying art. And so I have some videos that also display some of what this would look like in practice in person. I think the word vomit looks nice and gross. and I had some sound effects coming out. And I would want people to play with it. Like I want these to be tactile objects if they get displayed in a professional manner that people can play with and are encouraged to touch. I also like sound has come up. I like the crinkling of this bag. And then I also have this wire piece. So the warp is wire, the weft, or what I wove side to side, is a metallic yarn. And then it becomes this sort of kinetic, tactile art fidget, which I'm really into, and I want to make more of these. So I'm really into people interacting with the work very physically and displaying in different ways. I have this booklet that I made, again, a different way of sort of displaying something people can handle. And I actually have a peek at my sketchbook at the top right with my very crude drawings. But I have a bunch of these crude drawings that I'm always adding to and working on, and eventually they become reality like this booklet did. This was something I tried to make into a shirt, which was me trying to make things useful, and then I didn't do it well. But I like the way it came out because we have this very beautiful warp. I love the warp, it's so pretty. And we have this space in between with these fringe coming in like monster teeth almost. And I kind of want to like put a piece in the middle, maybe an aluminum foil piece, because again, the weaving sort of becomes the frame, and then there can be something in between, which I'm really interested in. And I did some close-ups on that warp. I love it. I like the bright blue and the sort of softer green, and they're both striped yarns, which I think is part of what made them go together. So I just love that. And then that takes me to here. So I, in trying to be a capital A artist, I have submitted to 2 exhibitions and got accepted. One was at Loop of the Loom, for an exhibit called Sensory Weaving, which seemed very appropriate for what I do. And then I also submitted to Museum Workers Create, which was an exhibition at the King Manor Museum. And so these are baby's first gallery shows, and I want to look into doing more. But even more so than that, I want to work towards my own gallery show. Now, this is way in the future, but I really want to do something that's different from a typical gallery show because I want it to be playful. I want it to be hands-on. I want people to play with my artwork. I want it to be non-white walls, like all these things where I'm trying to go outside of traditional art world. I really want to do in my own exhibition. So that's something I'm kind of making pieces towards. And so that's sort of my journey at the moment. I appreciate you all listening. Because now it is time for truly the main event, as I am the emerging artist and Amanda is very well established. So I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Martinez, who will do a visual description and then show off her work. So I'm going to spotlight.
Hi, thank you so much. It was really a joy to learn more about your work, Dana. And before I get going, I'm a light-skinned brown woman with dark brown long hair. I'm wearing a pink and brown striped shirt and some silver and turquoise jewelry. I'm also wearing black noise-canceling headphones. Okay, so I kind of wanted to take a step back. I really appreciated what you had to say about operating in a space of sort of outside of typical norms and having work be interactive and playful. So I wanted to show some images. These are actually taken by a friend from 10 years ago when I first came to New York. And this was me outside of her space when we were having a bit of a natural dyeing day, which was something that we did at the time. We both worked for a textile artist back then, and this was something that we would do to take that knowledge onto our own time. And I wanted to show these images because in the, for lack of a better word, career that I've built here over the last 10 years. I think most people associate my work being in the realm of sculpture, but textiles are something that has always sort of been in the background. So I wanted to show this element. And I think at this time I learned that I really loved the the communal nature of textiles and work that is related to the tradition of craft in general, and how knowledge is shared and not gatekept. And just skipping ahead, this is a work from my recent solo exhibition at Hesse Flatow here in the city in last fall of 2022. And I would say it's a good typical example of my sculptural practice. This work it's a black carved piece which rests on a stucco base, which is built to housing code for both structural and conceptual reasons. This piece is called manera, which in Spanish means way. So I was thinking a lot about forms that at their core connect people and also serve as division. So this sort of traditional form that can be seen in a lot of Mexican modernism and minimalism, with this sort of classic stepped ziggurat-like form. I also wanted to use this image to talk a bit about the concept of querencia, which has basically driven my practice for the past, I would say, 2 years at this point. And it basically translates to querer means to want or to desire. And I love this word because it's a really poetic translation that doesn't have an exact translation to English, but it essentially has to do with place identity. And it's basically a place where one feels most true to themselves. It's a homing place, a place you return to when you're most fully yourself. And it's very particular to the vernacular of the New Mexico area, where a portion of my family originates from, and from which I draw a lot of aesthetic inspiration. This is another wood carving in pine with a frame that I made from birch and spruce. And I just wanted to show this as a pretty typical example of my practice over I would say the last 5 to 6 years. And I was also thinking a lot about, when you were speaking, Dana, about sort of a cumulative nature of letting a lot of things build upon themselves. I don't think it's particular to autistic folks, but I think it's something we excel at. This is a piece called Ear to the Ground, Tajetes Lucida. And it is a carving of pine and spruce with a base that is actually made of Baltic birch plywood, which was from a former illegal live workspace that I was in for 2.5 years. And this was sort of an interesting point in my practice the last few years, because coating the underside of the base is actually a wax emulsion, which has what's called pericon, or Mexican mint marigold, mixed into the emulsion. So in a sense, it was a way of returning to some of those natural dye practices. And I used it primarily on this piece for the strong smell that it has. Pericon is it's a medicinal plant for the indigenous cultures in the region of Mexico. And it can be made into teas, tinctures, natural dyes, obviously. And I believe, depending on how you prepare it, it can even have psychotropic properties. So putting it on the underside of this piece was a way of kind of being grounding and medicinal, based on some things that were going on in my life at that moment. And as I said, this was 2021. Excuse me. Skipping ahead to this one, this is a small basket woven piece, also from late 2021, which coincidentally was sort of the point in time in my life where many things are coming to a head. And this period is what ultimately led to first an autistic self-diagnosis and then beginning the process of formal diagnosis. And I think it's, yeah, we can speak a bit about this in a moment, Dana, but it was a combination of feeling like, I think every artist or maker knows there's this point in your practice where you have the desire to incorporate new approaches or methods. And this was certainly a point in time where I was feeling that draw. And in a way that is pretty typical for autistic folks, I went down a rabbit hole of a special interest, which I had long researched and looked into, but just sort of gave myself, you know, the unnecessary but needed permission to pursue teaching myself basket making, which of course I think a lot of folks see as a type of weaving. And I started pairing it with these stucco bases, like I often use in my sculptures, as a way for, I think, exploring how it could be functional or not and relate to the rest of my practice. And this is a larger version of that. It's called Onus Keeper from 2022, which is actually a synonym play on the words for burden basket, which some of you may know is sort of a traditional type of basketry used in many indigenous, particularly Southwestern cultures. And for me, this is a way of kind of containing a lot of unknowns about my family and where they come from, and just in general, kind of keeping with the concept of querencia. This is a piece called Touch Earth, which is a cast adobe brick on a found lumber base that I made to fit it exactly. And adobe is a process of natural earth building. There's many, many old structures throughout the Southwest that have been there for centuries and will continue to stand. And I think that earth building actually has a strong relationship with textile practices and natural dyeing. I think there's a lot of similarities in how you approach the material, how you gather the material, forage them, manipulate them. And ultimately, a lot of these practices take place outside. This one I cast on the roof of my studio on a hot summer day. Just to continue with the basketry, this is a woven reed work on some enameled found lumber. And I was trying to create a bridge between the act of basketry and the carved reliefs that I've been working in. And this just felt like a nice meeting point. This piece is called Self Map, and I was thinking about with this one, this is another viewpoint of it, and this work as well, which is called Indice, of the concepts of ancient codexes, and indexes and record keeping, and how that can kind of be put in a personal frame of reference, like for the act of journaling or self-exploration. And this is a piece called Fragment, which I slowly worked on over the past, from 2020 to 2023. And I think it's a sort of a funny little piece in that it's an interesting meeting point between these natural practices like earth building and dyeing and textile work, and the more synthetic materials, construction materials that I sometimes will find or purchase and work with and manipulate, in that it's carved from construction materials and then coated in a crushed garnet stone and sand. So I like the kind of interplay between those two worlds. I'm quickly skipping through a few drawings here. I did feel my drawing practice was worth mentioning, and these are all for folks who need an audio description. I'll do my best here. Each one is a bit different, but these are roughly between 6 and 9 inches and 8 I would say 9 by 12 at the largest. And they're all different colored graphite on paper. And each one uses, I would say overall, there's a solid form that I'm often filling in with this sort of cumulative visual language that I use in my carved works. But I would say that my drawing practice is pretty well separate on some level. It's definitely related. And I'm an artist who sort of loves to operate without a particular hierarchy of, one way of working is more, quote unquote, meaningful or important than others. Instead, I like to think of it as sort of uh, an act of translation, that I'm more someone who has worked to creating an overall language, and that each way of working is actually just a different version of speaking or recording that language. And I think before I was diagnosed, this is also a way of sort of self-soothing. I think I will speak for myself, but I think it's fairly common that communication or lack thereof, or difference of communication, is such a huge part of identifying as autistic. And this is called Retazo. It's actually my first etching edition, which was produced in 2022 with a really wonderful etching press based in the city called Harlan and Weaver. They work with some really fantastic folks there. And again, in the interest of kind of learning a new language or translating an existing one, and learning new skills, this was a really interesting meeting point for me, in that it was on the surface an act of drawing, but it also felt very related to carving. I think there's a lot of crossover in the way that you approach etching, carving these lines into a copper plate, leaving an embossed imprint. I don't know, it felt a lot like working in relief for me. And it was something I really enjoyed learning about for the first time, because where I attended school, the printmaking department was very separate from what I was studying in sculpture. These are some more simple, just line drawings on paper. I kind of think of these as process drawings, and excuse me, these are just sort of, I don't know, they're exercises for me in a way. I don't really go into them with any particular expectations or outcome. They're just sort of a way of working through making and thinking while I work, and just keeping my hand busy. But at the end of the day, I think they relate to going even further back, from the natural dying photos I showed you in the beginning. When I was much younger, I studied music, and these are some early examples of scores that I wrote. And when I think about them now, it's like all of these ways of making are super interrelated and connected, and I really don't see them as separate. I see music, especially the musical score, as a drawing on paper that you interact with, you perform. So I just thought that would be fun to share. And really quickly, these are some simple digital line drawings, black lines on white screen, that I think act as a funny bridge point between musical notation and these embroideries that I wanted to touch on. Going back to the concept of querencia and thinking about, Chicano or Mexican American or indigenous identity in the Southwest, I wanted to start making versions of what are called colcha bordado or colcha embroidery, that really put my own spin on what is a historic and traditional technique, and ultimately has a very complex and loaded history. Colcha literally means bedspread in Spanish, but it basically refers to a type of embroidery that uses a downward angled self-couching stitch. And it would typically use imagery, often like birds or religious imagery or florals, this sort of thing, in a decorative way. And I just thought it was sort of the perfect aesthetic visualization of the melting of those complex cultures that exist in New Mexico. So to really sort of make this loaded process my own, I wanted to use more modern materials, materials that made sense for my way of working, you know, working in sculpture, working in construction. So I used industrial wool felt and then synthetically dyed merino wool thread. And these are just a couple quick examples of historical cultural embroidery. This one, I believe, is from 1850, and I just love how sparse it is. This is another one that is more typical of the kind of nature and floral scenes. And to kind of finish up, trying to quickly go through these are some recent carvings from a show that I had earlier this year, March, April in Pittsburgh, called Labor. And this is sort of where my practice is at this moment. Of this piece is called Working Meditation, Rio Grande. And of course, you may know Rio Grande, the river in New Mexico, but it's also refers to a style of weaving that, again, like colcha bordado, is the result of the unique aesthetic mixture that occurs in a place like New Mexico in the Four Corners area. So when I was creating the structure of this carving, which is bright blue and about 4 feet wide by 6 feet tall, and 4 inches in depth, I was thinking about the way that Rio Grande weavings are constructed, which is in this striped style with a lot of banding, particularly at the top and bottom. There will be wide bandings that divide up the weavings. So this is an example of a Navajo or Dene made Rio Grande rug, and you can see the wide banding at the top and middle dividing all of the stripes, which are supposed to remind you of looking at a river. And this is another example using a bit more of a pattern. And then this work is Working Meditation Chimayo, which is referencing the Chimayo style of rug, the visual structure of how they're made. Chimayo is also the name of a town in New Mexico where these rugs really became known and famous. And so typically, you know, I structured this relief carving to look like the typical style of a Chimayo rug, which usually features a diamond pattern with 3 diamonds and then, you know, sort of a variation between the sizes of bandings. So here is a close-up of that. And this is a brown relief carving, which is also 4 feet wide by 6 feet tall and 4 inches in depth. And this is a typical Chimayo style rug. So I thought it would be interesting to see again, the 3 diamond pattern. Sometimes the diamonds are touching, sometimes there's space between them. And then there's these wider bands typically at the top and bottom dividing the visual space. And if you really want to look into it, each of these symbols does have its own meaning and symbolism behind it, which I just love the kind of built-in conceptual underpinning of that. But that's a whole other conversation. And this is just, I thought I would throw this in. This is a saltillo rug carving, or sorry, rug weaving, which is something I'm working towards replicating in a carving at the moment. I just love how complex the saltillo style can get. And then kind of mirroring that form, actually, now that I'm looking at it for the first time, this was my return to basket weaving, but I wanted it to really feel more related to my relief and carving practice. So I was like, how can I actually make the structure itself 3-dimensional and not just sort of mounted on a flat surface? So this is actually using a coiled technique, which again, it has been around for millennia in various cultures around the world. But I was in particular thinking about Inde or Apache, indigenous and Mexican techniques of coiled basketry. So this is using dyed fibers, in this case, raffia, over a reed base. And this is a close-up of that process. And then my last piece I'll sort of talk about, which I think is, it's a sort of a culmination of many things that I've been working on over the past, especially 3 to 5 years. This is a piece that just opened at Brooklyn Botanic Garden called Cercado. And cercado means, in the Spanish that I know, and of course it changes dialect to dialect, but it can mean a wall, a fence, or an enclosure. So I really wanted to create a public artwork that was accessible for everyone. And this is my first large-scale public sculpture. And I was thinking a lot about how being, diagnosed autistic and as a member of the disability community, I wanted to create something for us when the reality is that we're not really considered in a lot of public spaces, much less public artworks can still be inaccessible to us, even though art is supposed to be for everyone. So I put this piece right against the curb, the pavement, a paved path that goes throughout the garden. And I created a just about 4-foot wide openings, and 3 feet is standard wheelchair access, so that anyone could roll in and experience the space. And then I'm working with the horticulture team, who will be installing a mesh that will provide traction for wheelchairs on top of the grass in the coming week or two. So this piece will continue to evolve, and I'm really excited about that. Here's the last close-up of a cast pigmented cement piece that I made to go in the center of Cercado, which I was really thinking of, if you know the term stim toy, as a large oversized stim toy, which is a tool that us autistic folks use for self-regulation or sensory seeking. And I wanted to find a really oversized, sort of simple, elegant solution for the public to be able to interact in that way. And the last thing I'll say is that the material for this project was sourced about 50% from the garden itself, especially their fig trees, and then 50% from a neighboring a site called Cunningham Park, which is basically an oversized mulch yard where a lot of the city takes its plant matter and it just gets chipped into mulch. So it was really important to me that everything in this piece be sustainable or reused in some way as well. And that is the work I wanted to share with you guys. And I will turn it back over to Dana. Hi.
So we are now into our little discussion portion of this talk, where Amanda and I are just going to go back and kind of share some things that we've sort of learned about each other's work and ask questions and all that fun stuff. So, I mean, I guess something that has come up is we are both autistic artists.
Yes.
And so I guess something to talk about is just like, how does that play in your work, and how has it played over the course of sort of the diagnosis and identifying process?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about, I just loved your piece, Euphoria in Blue, because there is something particular about autistic joy, that it's being written about more, it's being discussed more. Just the way we experience and express joy is very, very intense and full body. And I think about how that translates to the way that we make as well.
Yeah, and I think something that was interesting to me about when I was making that piece is like, my favorite color is purple. And when I think of joy, I think of bright colors. But for some reason, I was drawn to this very gentle blue. And I think, to me, the main part of that blue is relief. Because I had that imposter syndrome for a long time.
Yeah.
I'd been self-identifying for a year. We talked, like, we actually had a very similar journey, emotionally and time-wise, timeline-wise, as to when this happened for us. So I was self-identifying, but I always felt like I might be lying to people. I might be making it up. Maybe I'm just, being sensitive or blah, 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 all those things. And so I think it was blue is the color of relief for me when I got that formal diagnosis.
Yeah,
Which
it's
is
funny. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
not go.
I would absolutely use the word relief to describe my experience of being formally diagnosed as well. I think I was self-identifying for a shorter period, just because I felt like once that trajectory started, it was maybe 6 months or something, before I started, applying for grants to cover the process of formal diagnosis and then receiving that, and moving ahead. But yeah, relief is definitely the word for it. Just like being able to put a word to it was so powerful.
Yes. And being believed, I think, is part of
Mhm.
also too, like wanting to be believed and wanting to have people understand you. And sometimes when you self-identify, you worry that people will hold back from believing you, I feel like. At least that's how I felt.
Mhm.
Yeah,
There's definitely a lot to that. And I think I also identified with I was worried about imposter syndrome, or just like, not really believing myself, which is sort of sad, but I was like, I need that outside confirmation for sure.
someone in the
Um,
comments said validated, which I think is the
yeah.
perfect word.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a little bit about, or just kind of bring up your thoughts on like the impact or influence of some of our innate autistic qualities, like the way that we are, the particular way that we are creative, like pattern seeking, hyper focus, self-regulation. Obviously, you talked about making work that you can stim with, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, stimming is a huge thing for me. I didn't, when I came to the self-identification part, I realized that I always felt like this, like I was white knuckling and holding back movement.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize I was doing that because I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
And then when I allowed myself to finally do it, it's like you said, it's self-regulation. So it allows me to like feel less pent up, less anxiety. My anxiety has gone a lot now that I let myself move much more freely.
Mhm.
And I think I did art. Like I think I crafted as a way to socially appropriately stim. Uh, and now I actually think I make more art now that I accept the stim part of myself as well as
Mhm.
stimming on top of it, which is interesting. I think it's just like sort of this creative explosion because I was holding so much in.
Yeah.
Uh, and I also do think hyperfocus plays into it. I mean, I think the funny thing with me as an arts worker and working at many very different museums is they would all sort of become my hyperfocus for a bit. I was never super into trains, but I was really into trains for a while when I worked at the Transit Museum, which is, funnily enough, a very oddie thing to do.
For sure.
And then I worked at a Native American museum, I worked at a children's museum, and now I work for a weaving nonprofit. But I don't think that hyper focus necessarily means like I'm not interested in those things. There is no inherent interest, but I do go into it very strongly. And then like I experimented so much in the first few months with weaving, uh,
Mm.
both in a personal and in a professional sense, because I was like, ooh, this is fun. Let's play with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that like whole body deep dive of
Mhm.
special interest. Yeah, I also really relate to the having, before you knew this fact about yourself, and your identity, like having art making be a socially acceptable way of self-regulation was 100% like the case for me. Like I think when I started first self-diagnosing, um, I went down the internet rabbit hole, and like that was sort of how I arrived at, finding, for lack of a better word, the symptoms that I was experiencing. And the main image I came upon, I think it's on like the Wikipedia article or something for autism, was like a tween child, maybe like 12, 13, like stacking objects. And I was like, I just started crying. I was like, oh my God, this is my entire practice. Like the cumulative way of working, of like lining things up, organizing, creating your own, like systematizing that sort of way of seeing the world. I was like, wow, I've just been self-soothing this entire time without knowing it.
Yeah, and I think that we both have very tactile works, ones that are very touchable in many ways, that are very physical. And I mean, even in your drawings, like it feels like if you, you know, put your hand down it, that it'll have ridges and things. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
Do you mind if I take questions from
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Has identifying as being on the spectrum changed how you teach and or communicate with others around art making?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I started self-identifying very close to when I started this job. And I had taught people with disabilities before, working in museums. But I think seeing myself in, like, putting myself in those shoes made me realize, oh, like, have a lot more empathy, because like sometimes you're like, this is an alien thing that this person is doing that I don't understand. And you have some training for it, but honestly, training is not necessarily the best in many institutions for those things. But you didn't really actually get the full empathy of why are people acting the way they act. And I was like, oh, they're just doing a big stim. I stim all the time. I flap my hands. They're flapping their hands. But I just didn't let myself do a lot of the things that many disabled people do, because I didn't see it as socially acceptable. And because I could, quote unquote, hold it back. And so I had a lot more empathy for the way people are when teaching people with disabilities, definitely. And it also did affect the way I communicate, because I realized, oh, when people are overwhelmed, like, more of a step back than a trying to like control everything. And you know, I know when I get overwhelmed, more talking doesn't help me.
Exactly.
And so like it kind of, again, it's the empathy of that, I think really changed for me. I did understand it to a professional extent, but not to a personal extent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, this, I mentioned I've like lectured and done visiting artists, worked as a visiting artist with different schools in the last few years, but this is my first conversation where this is an open part of the discussion. So I think going forward, anywhere that I may lecture or interact with students, art students or otherwise, like it will 100% shape that interaction. Yeah, I am super excited for, as you were saying, like being aware that there was something going on, but not allowing yourself to fully express it. You know, like for instance, this is the first conversation about my work where I haven't scripted the entire thing, which is why there were some pauses and I was thinking here and there. Because typically that's how I have to speak about my work in the, you know, quote unquote art world. Any lecture I've given has been highly, highly scripted. Any interaction I've given has been very scripted. And scripts, of course, can help autistic folks do a lot of things, but I was looking forward to this because with this understanding that we all have in this space, it feels vastly different to me.
And I think the scripting is really poignant for me because I did museum tours. That's, again, I relied on those scripts quite strongly to do my work. So I think that's great. We have another question. What kind of art are you teaching or guiding to people that are not so verbal? Well, I can speak from the Intertwine Arts side. We teach weaving. We have Sayori floor looms, which are very accessible to many people, but we also have hand-fold cardboard looms. We have circle plate looms, and beyond. We also do other textile art. we have these art yarn, which is the twisting yarns together that we've been doing. And we can teach these things without necessarily talking to people. Showing how to weave is actually, it seems like there's a big barrier to it, but there actually isn't, because the basic tenet is over under. If you can get the over under, then you're weaving. And so you just show it physically is all it is.
Yeah, I think that's the really beautiful thing about many art practices. And I'm not a teacher per se, I just lecture occasionally, but so I don't have that experience that this person is asking about. But yeah, so many art practices can just be taught by showing or physical touch, you know, even if you're not sighted, like there's so many things that can be learned in other ways. It is its own way of communication in a way.
Yeah, and even if someone is nonverbal, they can still hear what you're saying most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. So you can still talk through the instructions. They just may not be able to respond back in a typical manner. These are great questions.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I wanted to pitch while here, because you have the Autistic Artists Alliance.
Oh, sure.
You've been pioneering, and I'd love to hear more about it, and I want to join it soon.
Sure. Yeah, please join. It's open to anyone who self-identifies or otherwise as autistic, specifically autistic adults, I should say, because basically I just wanted to create a space for us that it is right now online. It's still in the early stages. We do have our website up. We have a Discord chat room, which will be used more specifically very soon. And there's an artist directory where folks can share the work that they do, whether they have a website or social media or whatever capacity they would like to share. And right now we already have folks from around the world on there, which is super exciting. And I also allowed folks to identify with the term artist in a really, really broad sense. So for example, right now we have artists on there who are actors, writers, video artists, performance artists, dancers, painters, weavers, you know, the whole gamut. Like I wanted it to be as widespread and as inclusive as possible. And then there's also a mutual aid fund I'm still working on for autistic artists in need to use however they see fit, whether that's for, you know, personal reasons, something in their studio, etc. And yeah, the Discord is really, I'm still working on setting it up, but it's for basically having virtual studio visits with each other, with the community, also bringing in other autistic folks, whether they're critics, writers, curators, that sort of thing. And just having it be a really open but safe space for autistic adults who identify as artists. Someone asked, what is this group? It's called Autistic Artist Alliance. And you can go to, I'll put it here in the chat, Autistic Artist
I'll flash
Alliance.com.
I'll flash information at the end too.
Great. Yeah, you can find us online. The website is up and largely functional at this point. The Discord is up, although right now it's password protected just to be a safe space. And then we also have an Instagram as well, which will have a lot more activity in the coming weeks. It's been on a bit of a pause while I was doing the botanic garden thing, but now I'm getting back to it.
Thank you for joining, Jane. We are a little bit over time, which is okay. I just wanted to, we've talked a lot about autism, which is, you know, part of who we are, and it does inform how we make. I just want to end on one question focusing on the art. And that's just to say, like, where would you like your art to grow? Like, what pathways are you kind of headed towards?
Yeah, I feel like for once I have a pretty definitive answer. I feel like in the recent past, I've just sort of operated on like, I don't know, the work informs itself. I'll see where it goes. But at this point, making the public and accessible work that I made for Brooklyn Botanic Garden is really like, it was so healing just working outside, being able to see the direct impact that it has on folks who, may not always be able to access public art, and the materials I was using and the way in which I was using them. That's really, it's already informing things I'm working towards in the fall. So I'm super, super excited about that. How would you answer that question?
I mean, I think I want to make bigger. I think for so long, I make things small to not take up much space. And I think part of me trying to get out of that, like making things that are useful, making things that will turn into something, and also just like professionalizing my work to some extent, is I need to make bigger. I need to like get out of this tiny headspace I've been in. And I feel like that's sort of where I've been going towards anyways, in terms of this creative expansion within the past year, is to make things bigger. Which may seem like a very general answer.
No, it's valid. It's
Yeah.
valid.
And just like take up more space that way. And I think all the other elements of my work are already there, like the tactility, playfulness. So in terms of trying to move that somewhere, it's make bigger.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you everybody for joining us for Textile Medley, our next talk on July 12th, which will be sort of a knitting theme to it, with Jill Schoenfuss and Nicole Messer. And shameless plug, donate if you have the ability to. It keeps these programs going. It allows us to do more artist talks, but also very important, if you want to contact myself or Amanda, here is the information. So thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And thank you, Dana.